A few years ago, I set out to build a business that would change my life. And within a year, sure enough, it changed my life, but into a living hell. And it was because I constantly felt like I was drained and lost, and quite frankly, just spinning my wheels, never making any meaningful progress. And I just could not understand why this was and why I felt like I could go nowhere until eventually I realized something huge. And that was that I was like a car. I was going full throttle, but with the brakes on at the same time. And when I realized that, it became pretty obvious why I felt like I was spinning my wheels, because I was. And ultimately, the lesson there was that I was so focused on doing things faster and quicker and better, doing things right, so efficiently, that I never stopped to question myself if I was even doing the right things in the first place, effectively. And that was a huge lesson for me. And it taught me that life isn't just about pushing harder, because if you push harder, you're ultimately potentially going to go faster, sure, but you'll just be going faster on the same treadmill. And most of us don't need to go faster. We just need to get off of the treadmill and focus on doing the right things. And more recently, I created this concept, which is inspired by my past mentor, Elias Miller, who has built a 1 million a year company at the age of 21. And I've called it the value energy matrix or energy value matrix. And well, the reason I felt so drained constantly is because I focused most of my time and energy into this quadrant. And well, I just run through each of these quadrants. And by the way, by the time you fully understand this, you'll be able to apply this to your life to ensure that you can make meaningful progress in your business and build your business, but in a way that energizes you rather than drains you. And when you can do that, it becomes a compounding process and a self-fulfilling prophecy. So basically, the more the more energy you put in, the more value you create, and the more energized you are, and so on. Instead of it being the other way around, where you do work but you feel drained. So let's start with quadrant one. And in quadrant one, you create value. So basically, the activities in this quadrant, they create value, but they drain you. And well, I have a quote by Henry David Thoreau here. He says, "The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it." So the point is that this quadrant, putting your time and energy into this quadrant, is a zero-sum game. You create value, but at what cost? And the answer is your life. And for that reason, what we want to do with this quadrant is we want to delegate to others or automate these activities with systems. And well, ideally, you want to spend no more than 5% of your time in here. And for me, well, actually, first of all, any activity that is in here is needle moving because it actually grows your business, it creates value for you, but it's just simply not within your zone of genius. So, they're still necessary things, but they won't energize you, they will drain you because once again, they're not in your zone of genius, if you will. And by the way, what I mean by zone of genius, I'm referring to what Roger James Hamilton talks about in this book. And essentially, it's a concept that each of us have. Obviously, we're all different, and each of us have different strengths. And if I were to draw a little thing here like this, then at the top we have the creative people, they're the kind of innovators. On the bottom here, we have the kind of strategists who are more pragmatic and practical. On the right, we have the connectors or empaths who are really extroverted, outgoing people. And on the left here, we have the analysts who are very logical, introverted people. And basically, the point is that I was doing tasks to grow my business, the one that drained me a few years ago, by focusing on tasks that were in here. They were growing my business, but they were extremely draining for me because as a luminary, which is between these two here, by the way, this is something I'll go over in a different video. But basically, long story short, my strengths lie in people and ideas. So basically being creative and working with people. And these tasks in here that I was doing, so by the way, it was cold calling. I was doing extremely repetitive work, just cold calling people to try and pitch my business to try and sign clients. Well, they were the opposite of my strengths. They were actually my weaknesses because it was extremely repetitive, and I was isolated in my room for hours and hours. In fact, working 14 hours a day, just feeling extremely drained. And yet now I work only a fraction of that time, less than half, and I get twice as much done, and I feel more creative and driven and fulfilled, and life has changed, the point is. So basically, long story short, these are tasks that will move the needle for your business, but they're just not in your zone of genius. And so you want to ideally delegate them to others or automate them with systems. And the reason I just told you my example there is because in my case, it wasn't about delegating or automating. It was actually about just pursuing a completely different business in general. I was just doing the wrong thing in the first place. But in your case, if you've already got a business going and you know it's the right thing, it aligns with your values and your purpose, then you want to delegate these or automate them. Now moving on to quadrant 2. Now this one is the sweet spot. And this is where you create value and it's your zone of genius. Sorry, so it creates value and it energizes you, which means it is in your zone of genius and is needle moving. And Aristotle said, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. So the point is that these few activities that go into this quadrant, you ideally want to put 80% of your time here, because the few activities here, so basically the 20% of activities that go into this quadrant, will drive 80% of your results. And so when you put time into here, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or basically your results compound. Because when you invest your time, by the way, you're not spending time here, you're investing time here. So when you work on things that go into this quadrant, you feel more energized, and so you create more value, and so you feel even more energized, and so you create even more value. So it compounds. Instead of if you're somewhere over here, it's only you're compounding negatively. And so ideally, the point is you want to truly know yourself, first of all, because we have to know what actually is meaningful to us in the first place and what energizes us. And so once we get clear on those things, we can invest our time and energy into here. And by the way, if you're struggling with procrastination, overwhelm, and burnout like I was in the initial stages of building my first business, the reason is because we don't truly know ourselves, first of all, and because we're not using this. To explain, we usually procrastinate because the reason we procrastinate is because we have negative feelings associated with a task. And usually we have those negative feelings associated with the task is because we're not focusing our time and energy on the right tasks in the first place. Basically, tasks that go into here and drain you. So no wonder you want to avoid them. And usually we feel drained or burned out because once again, we're focusing on tasks that drain us, and we feel overwhelmed because we've not gotten clear on any of this in the first place. And so you feel like you have to handle everything when really you don't. And what you find is that most people spend 80% of their time on these quadrants that drain them, and they actually only create 20% of their results, yet they're just chasing those results because they feel urgent. Right, now let's move on to quadrant 3. So in quadrant 3, these activities, they don't create value and they drain you. So they're doubly bad. And this is not a quote by Socrates, actually, it's by Seneca. I must apologize. But he said, beware the barrenness of a busy life. Or sorry, let me say that again clearly. Beware the barrenness of a busy life. So basically, most people actually spend most of their time here feeling productive when really they're just busy. They're just finding things to do. And we do that because, once again, it makes us feel productive. So we feel like we're making progress when really we're actually just draining ourselves and often not creating any value. And activities in this quadrant include things like doom scrolling, pointless meetings, and overcomplicating simple tasks. And so you want to eliminate these ideally as much as possible and spend ideally 0% of your time here. Now, I will say something that I learned from Tim Ferriss from his book, The 4 Hour Work Week. He says, never delegate what you can automate and never automate what you can eliminate. So basically, any activities that go into here, they drain you, so you don't want to do them, but they also don't create value. There's no reason to delegate them to other people. And also, there's no reason to automate them either because they don't create value, right? So I think it's pretty obvious that you don't want to spend much time here, but the issue is that most people do. And what you find nowadays is that common sense isn't common. And so most people spend a lot of their time here achieving nothing, quite frankly, unfortunately. And I spent a lot of my time here in my early stages as well. And then lastly, moving on to quadrant 4. In this quadrant, these activities, they don't create value, but they do energize you. And Anne Lamott, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. Anne Lamott. Sorry, Anne, by the way, if that's wrong. She said, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. And basically, the point is that in quadrant 4, these are activities that are recharging for you. So basically, things like social time, rest and recharge, and deep play, or in other words, hobbies. And the key here is that you want to use this as deliberate rest, not a distraction, but deliberate rest. And this is something that Alex Young Kim Pang, once again, I hope I said that right, talks about in the book Rest. Excellent book. And basically, the point is that, once again, life is not about doing more, but it's about doing things better, of course. And when you invest your time here, not spend, but once again, invest your time here, you're able to come back stronger and more energized to do better work in quadrant 2. So hustle culture usually sees this quadrant as a waste because, why rest? But actually, that's not true. It is an investment because you come back and you do better work, quality over quantity. You've heard that before. As cliche as it is, it's true. And ideally, you want to, obviously, this is an estimate, invest around 15% of your time here. By the way, that's your work time. So that will be your breaks. And then outside of your work, you want to invest probably most of your time here. And once again, the key here is that you want to use this to recharge, not escape. So activities like doom scrolling on your phone do not go into here because they don't energize you. They drain you. So things in here, once again, include social time, sleep, deep play, just doing things you love. And those things will recharge you so you can come back and do better work. And by the way, I know you may be thinking, what do you mean rest and, deep play, doing hobbies and social time? I don't have time for that. I need to focus on growing my business. And well, that's exactly the same thing I thought when I was focusing all my energy on these two things. But the reason we feel like we don't have time for these things is because we're too caught up and too busy doing these things. And so we just end up getting lost and drained and never having time for the right things because we're too busy doing the wrong things. It's a funny thing we do as humans, but it's just true for most of us. We're just stuck on a treadmill. So to summarize, this is honestly really simple. And if you want to apply this to your life to actually change your life, as this truly changed my life, then I would first of all get to truly know yourself. I know that may sound funny, but the biggest thing I learned in my journey is that most of us don't truly know ourselves well enough. And that's why we procrastinate and feel overwhelmed and drained, because we don't know what is truly meaningful to us, what energizes us, and what our natural strengths are, and how to leverage our natural strengths. Because all of us are different, right? Of course. And Albert Einstein, you've probably heard this quote, he said, everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life believing it is stupid. And most people that are caught up doing activities that fit into these two quadrants feel like that fish, just like I did when I first started my first business, because we're just focusing on the wrong things that make us feel useless and drain us. So that's the first thing. Get to truly know yourself. And by the way, I will link my free school community. It's called Know Yourself, where you can get to know yourself. And currently, I'm also offering free consultations to help you with that. But then the second thing I would do is draw out this quadrant and plug all your activities that you do in any given day into these quadrants. And what you find most often when, if you are someone who feels drained or you procrastinate, that you focus most of your time not on things that energize you, but on things that drain you. And then third of all, well, use it. Use it to change your life and reorganize your life and work to work for you, not against you. So with that, I will leave things here because this video is probably already quite long by now, but I wish you all the best. Keep going, never stop. And until next time, ciao.